Welcome to Consider Yourself Hugged. I am your host, Tammy West, and I'm so happy to be with you this first week of 2023. You might notice a wee change in my background here, and that's because I've moved my studio well, you may remember originally I had the podcast closet, which I dearly loved. And then I moved and we did a studio in the garage. But now I've moved it into my office. But my wonderful photographer husband, Tim, has not helped me set up the background, like a backdrop, or we haven't gotten all that set up yet. But it's coming, and there's a reason it's coming, and I will tell you why in just a few minutes. So first, I really need to apologize to you. I didn't have a podcast last week, and I hope you know that, and I hope you were bummed about it. So I hope you were like, oh my gosh, where's that podcast? But I want to be completely transparent with you, because I did post on social media that we had some travel issues. We had some health issues. Like every single one of us were sick, and it wasn't anything awful, but just like blah. Half the people who were supposed to come to Christmas didn't come to Christmas because they were sick. And my son missed his flight and had missed Christmas Eve with his grandparents. And he finally got in at like 10 o'clock that night. And it was just like one thing after another. So I always set reminders on Wednesday morning, and my reminder goes off at 5 o'clock just in case I forget to post the show notes, because the show posts usually at 4 a.m., but I can't post the show notes until the show posts, or else it won't have a link anyway. And I'm not gonna, well, I do get up sometimes at 4, but anyway, I set the reminder for 5, and that way I can get it all together and get the show notes posted. Well, I'm up last Wednesday morning and I'm having my coffee, and my reminder goes off to do the show notes. And I was like, I didn't do a podcast. That's like how crappy I was feeling. I didn't even, and I'm like, do I need to set myself a reminder to record the podcast? Because honestly, this is one of the favorite things that I do. But anyway, I'm sorry. And I do hope that your holidays were just everything that you wanted them to be. I hope they were special. I hope you had a great New Year. I hope you had a great Christmas. And my last child who was home for the holidays just left this morning. So it's back to just Tim and me. And I am pumped for 2023. I'm so pumped for 2023. Part of the reason for this new studio that you're going to see evolve, maybe by next week, I'm not really sure, is that I am going to record a class that I will be promoting sometime, hopefully in February. So I hope that you'll sign up. I hope that you'll join me. And I struggled, like when I thought about recording today, I struggled because and I was like, why am I struggling? All day long, I've been struggling. It's like 2 o'clock here, Central Time. I should have recorded way earlier. I should have recorded yesterday, but I've just been like, what am I going to say? And I think I figured out mostly it's because I have so much that I want to say to you as we go into the new year, but we missed last week. And so now I'm like, so I think we'll know by the end of this recording that I'm going to do a part 1 and a part 2, because I can't quite get my brain wrapped around all the things that I want to tell you. So I thought what I would do today, I titled this, hang on, let me read the title again. I titled this, Your Mental Health Treatment in 2023. Where have we been? Where are we going? And actually, I should probably put in there, where have we been? Where are we? And where are we going? Now, listen, by mental health treatment, that could mean that you need actual treatment. The title of this podcast is Mental and Emotional Well-Being. So it doesn't mean that you have to have a diagnosis. I want you to be mentally well. I want you to be emotionally well. So mental health treatment can be anything that you do to help keep yourself mentally healthy. Now, for me, historically and currently now, it's been more of a treatment, because I am really struggling with my mental health at one point, or I have been. At one point, it was a diagnosis. You probably know some of my story if you've been with me before. So hopefully this is going to be a 2-parter. Today, I want to share a little bit of where I've been, and I want you to think about where you've been. And then I want to share just a bit of history with you so that you can kind of think about, well, where, like, I'll tell you where I've been and you're going to think about where you've been, but where have we been, like, as a history in treating mental wellness, keeping us mentally well. And, I guess the question too is, are we moving forward? Am I moving forward? Are you moving forward? So a bit about my history. You think about your history. I'll think about mine. As a child, I was born in 1964. So as a child, I was having panic attacks at about the age of 9. So this was in the 70s, and there really wasn't like a definition of having panic attacks. I was very anxious. Again, we just didn't talk about it. It was in the 70s. And so my mom took me to the doctor, and my treatment was to breathe in a paper bag when I was having these panic attacks, which, by the way, if you have panic attacks, breathing into a paper bag is like game changer. So do that if that happens to you. So that was it, really. I mean, that was all. So I had anxiety all this time. Going to school, I had anxiety. There was just nothing that we really did to that. So growing up, no real treatment. When the panic and anxiety became so bad when I was 30, yeah, I guess I was 30 then, and I could no longer function. And so several things had to happen. So let's jump into the old medical records and take a look. And I made myself some notes. So in August 11th, 1995, I went to my medical doctor for anxiety. He referred me to some sort of a community center, which I don't really, a community assistance program at Centennial Parthenon Pavilion, which is a hospital here in Nashville. So I'm not really sure what that was, but she recommended outpatient counseling, outpatient therapy. So I was good. On August the 14th, I found that counselor, and I went twice. And I've shared this story before. It's not in my medical records, but I share it all the time when I speak. So I go to this, I'm having like severe panic, and it was related to a teaching job. And, I've already shared a lot about my story on earlier sessions. So if I think about it, I'll put a link in the show notes. I might forget, but I've shared my story a lot. So I go to him twice that day. And because I can't, I feel like I'm completely out of control. I can't function. I'm completely distraught. I'm just flying. I can't even describe it. It's been so long ago, but I still can kind of feel it in my spirit. And the second time I went, his advice was, this is about a job, then why don't you just not take the job? Helpful. So that was on August 14th. On August 15th, I went back to my medical doctor. And in his own words, let's see, I wrote it down on here. I was, quote, almost immobilized and had really gone downhill. Admission was recommended to the mental hospital. Off I went. So I made a list of the treatments. Okay, so what we've gone from here as far as treatment for me was first going to my medical doctor, then being referred to this, whatever this center was in the hospital, them deciding outpatient therapy, going to the outpatient therapist, going back to my doctor, and my doctor recommending admission. So it was, and all of that actually occurred within just 4 days. So I was really going downhill quickly. And so when I was discharged, I was in the hospital. And then the outpatient part of that was, I made this list here, Zoloft, Xanax, Unisom, which is over-the-counter sleep aid, and Excedrin PM, which is an over-the-counter sleep aid. So after my stay, I remained on Zoloft for probably a couple of years. Xanax was more than I could handle. Klonopin is another drug that's kind of related, and that wasn't quite as severe on me and my body. I could function a little bit better. So Klonopin was for the really serious kind of crisis times when I couldn't get in the car, couldn't go anywhere. So I continued therapy, all of that for a while. And so now jumping forward, for nearly 25 years, I was off all my medications. Still had counseling occasionally, but off everything until, as we say, COVID. Everything is until COVID. And again, I've shared a lot of that. Your life has probably changed. All of us has had some kind of effect from living through this pandemic. It changed my life completely. And everything, all of my triggers were trigged. I know it's not a word. All of my triggers were triggered. Everything was triggered. And so I did go back on not Zoloft, but I went back on Klonopin, which was rough. I'm just going to tell you, I may do a session at some point just on medication, but for me, it took a couple of weeks to not feel like I had the flu. Basically, when I would get up and take it in the morning, I would feel tense, shaky, more anxious, and cold, and just really awful. But I knew from times past that was going to pass. So I went back on, I went on Lexapro in, let's see, that was probably October or November of 2020. And then I was on it for 6 months. Things were getting a lot better. 6 months, I think, could have been more. And so I talked to my doctor, decided to wean myself off. And then several months went by. And one of the things I always ask myself about my mental health and whether or not medication is something that I want to do is, am I still struggling even when my triggers aren't being triggered? Like, am I struggling with daily life? And I really was. It just, for some reason, I just couldn't pull myself out of it. So I decided to go back on it, which I currently am. And it has helped me tremendously. There's so much controversy out there about medications, and I'm going to speak to that in just a minute. But it's been very helpful to me. But now I'm at the point where, and I've said this before, I don't think for me that my triggers are broad enough that I want to be on medication for the rest of my life, because it's very situational. But here's what I noticed. Here's what I finally realized. Through that pandemic, and as my mental health was suffering, I didn't do what I used to do. I stopped learning. I stopped growing. I stopped being curious. I stopped thinking about what I needed to do in my life to make it better. And so that has changed. So over the past few months, I have just immersed myself in books, in podcasts about mental health, in blogs, in talking to people and getting advice and talking to my doctor. And so I'm going to talk more about what my plan is next week for 2023. And that's going to include something called EMDR for trauma. So that'll happen next week. But I'm done. It's not that I'm anti-medication. It's not that at all, but it does have some side effects for me. It makes me a little bit sleepy. And I don't think that I need to be medicated for the rest of my life. I believe there are some mental health conditions that are immensely helped by medication and I'm not a doctor, and I'm not recommending that you do or you don't take medication, or that you start or you stop, or none of that. As you know, that I've said before, just don't let anybody shame you into not taking care of your mental health, whatever that means to you. So this is where I've been, where I am. I hope that you've thought about where you've been and where you are. But I also mentioned before we go, I wanted to talk just a little bit about where we've all been, like historically. And I am going to do such a disservice to this book. And I thought about just not sharing it with you because I don't have like the organized details. But I'm going to just kind of share with you how it impacted me. I've been listening to an audiobook. It's called The Mind and the Moon by Daniel Bergner. I will put the link in the show notes. It's fabulous. I heard about it because he was interviewed on a podcast. So I listened to the interview. I bought his book. He shares stories of his brother who had mental health issues, and 2 other people in his world. So if you're interested in a little bit of interesting history about mental health treatment, and some stories and some thought-provoking advice, I mean, check it out. So since it's an audiobook, I usually listen while I'm walking. So I didn't take any notes. And so I'm like, oh, I can't remember all the details of what he said. So I just made a few notes of what really struck me. And I don't know if you know this, you probably do, but here are the things. Again, no dates, no details, but early mental illness was treated by chains and restraints. You probably know that at some point, and I don't know that this was in his book, But you probably know that at some point, people with mental illness were thought to be witches. They were burned, they were banned. Anybody who exhibited this behavior that just didn't seem normal. But at some point, chains and restraints became frowned upon, and a lot of the researchers and philosophers and doctors began to think, you know what, these people probably need a serene environment, a calmness for their spirit. And actually, there were some institutions created where they could get that. But that wasn't enough, and that changed again, and that morphed. And so through, I don't want to say accidental things, but just like penicillin was discovered through, well, we'll just call it an accidental thing. Electric shock therapy became a thing. And I remember when I was in the mental hospital, they brought, and this was in 95, and they would bring people back. It happened several times on the gurney who had gone through this. And so that was followed by the fabulous lobotomy, which in the beginning was actually boring holes or taking out pieces of brain. I think I might be saying that wrong. But at some point, it became peeling the eyeballs back and inserting like needle-like spikes into the brain. Sounds barbaric, right? I mean, it sounds awful. And it would have this effect of like sort of the walking zombie. Like it calmed whatever the mental illness behavior was, but the person wasn't really the same again. But what about today? What about, or going forward after that and today, those practices, I really don't know if electric shock therapy is something that's still happening. Lobotomies, I don't think so. I'm sure hoping not. But what about the medications? And I'll talk a little bit more about that next week as well. But some of these earlier medications basically left the person the same way. And there were medications, and Daniel talks about this in his book. And again, I don't have the specific details, but they were promoted for everything from mental health related behaviors to, oh, you're having conflict in your family. Here, just take this pill. And so it was prescribed for everything. And I'm just going to say it again, I'm just not giving this book what it needs, but it just really struck me when, and most of this I was listening to in chapter 2, and I haven't finished the book, by the way, but I'm just listening to it thinking, those poor people. And that's a carryover. Today, we still have that carryover of not talking about mental health because a lot of people just don't understand it. So I hope that was at least giving you something to think about as we go into 2023. Where have you been in your mental wellness? Was it a diagnosable mental illness? Was it in 2022 or beyond your childhood, your growing up period, your older years, teenage, young adult? Maybe you are a young adult. Where have you been? And where are you currently? Are you like me, where you just sort of stopped trying? You stopped being curious. Maybe you're on medication, but you're not doing anything else. And I've always said, and I will continue to say, medication can be very helpful, but it's not enough. Not if we're just not growing or not learning or not making changes. So where are we going to go in the future? That's the important part. And the future means like in 1 minute, tonight, tomorrow, next week, next year. The future holds everything to us. And I'm so excited for 2023 because 2022, especially the second half of 2022, taught me that I am passionate about this topic of mental and emotional well-being. I am here for you. I want to spend more time with you. I'm going to just start sharing more about this class that's coming up. I am doing an updated edition of the Stress Club, and I'm super excited about that. So I hope in your world you have a lot of exciting things coming up for 2023. I hope that you learned a lot of lessons for 2022. And now more than ever, I don't even think I've asked you the last couple of times, please subscribe and rate and download and invite your friends. If you're a woman, please join the Facebook group, A Place for Women, Consider Yourself Hugged. And I'll post in there more specific things that are just geared toward women. Follow me on Facebook. Just stay connected because 2023 is going to be the year where we are going to make big strides. So until I see you next week, consider yourself hugged.